joins us. So thank you for joining us in the ESHIP call. I'm going to try to do this gallery thing. I'm trying to get it so that all of us are appearing, like kind of the Brady Bunch view, but we'll see if that works out. So I sent off a question to all of you. What's a book or a story that had an influence on you, and why? So I'm going to ask Hassan, since you're big on my screen.
Well, you caught me off guard. I got to think about this. I mean, there's always a book that sticks in my head. I read it when I was a kid, and for some reason, it's always the one that stays in my head. It's a book by Alexander Dumas, The Count of Monte Cristo. It's for some reason that book, it was made into a movie not too long ago. It's an old book, but it just the story sticks in my head because of.
What about this story resonates with you?
I think it's about someone who. It was really. I mean, the story starts off. It's about this nice guy, young, really ambitious, and he goes off to sea. He leaves a fiancée behind, and there were some people that had it in for him, and he ends up going to jail, prison for something that he didn't do, and he ends up escaping from prison. He meets an old man in prison who tells him about a fortune on an island. The old man dies in prison. He escapes the island in the bag that they put the old man in to bury the old man in, and he makes it to this island, discovers all of his gold and wealth, goes back many, many years later to where he started. Nobody recognizes him and uses a different name. No one knows him. But he ends up doing good, but also exacting revenge on some of the people that threw him in jail. But it's just that, I mean, as a kid, I read this book. I think it was maybe 8 or 9, about 500-page book that was given to me by my dad. And for some reason, that story still, and I've read it numerous times over the years, but it's just so well written. And I think I read it one time. It's about a 450-page book, and I read it one time, literally, in a weekend.
Wow.
Because it's just, I mean, the story just draws you in.
So Hassan, did you see yourself as the hero in the book, or did you see yourself as an observer? Like, was there a role that resonated with you?
I think for some reason, I think you tend, like the stories that resonate with you, tend to identify with the main character. And I don't think I've had anything like that happen in my life, but for some reason I identified with the main character, Edmond Dantes.
So finding your fortune and going out and living your best life. So that sounds interesting. Hey, Sam, we're talking about books that affected us, and or books or stories that resonated with us, and why. So
I'm going to cheat a little bit, but for something that's related to probably what we're talking about, there's a book by Claude Bristol called The Magic of Believing.
The what?
The Magic of Believing by Claude Bristol.
Okay.
It's a motivational book.
Okay. The Magic of Believing. Interesting. So go ahead and call on somebody.
I will call Beth.
Thanks, Hassan. The one that comes to mind, there's a couple that come to mind with regard to what we're doing, and I just love everything that Adam Grant puts out. Do you guys know of him? The book Give and Take is really awesome and thought-provoking. Adam is a professor at Penn, I believe, and the book Give and Take, it talks about givers and takers and ultimately who wins and what kind of why, and it cites tons of research into this type of behavior, and it compares like the guy from Enron. We all remember the Enron debacle, and it shows how in their annual report or some important document, his picture is like takes up half the page, whereas givers, are a lot more humble, have a lot more humility, and are really in it for the reasons that they're in it for versus ego and and such. So that one was very good. And then he has another book called The Originals that really, I think, speaks to most of us, if not all of us, ecosystem builders, because none of us, I haven't met any ecosystem builder yet that is somebody that follows the status quo or accepts things as they are. And so The Originals is all about people like us. So again, and it's all, you know, researched and deeply, and a lot of different folks have had input into these subjects. So those are both books that I would highly, highly recommend from a fun perspective, but also informative from a human nature study. Is the Game of Thrones series is just very cool to dig into, right? How about you, Sam? Sam, are you with us?
I don't know. She's like there, but she's not. Sam's reading something.
You must be just in it for our beautiful faces here.
Okay, maybe.
Celia.
Okay, I guess it's me. I realized that I took a course on the 7 habits years ago, and I didn't realize how much it resonated with me. So about 10 years ago, I was in a workshop where we were doing practical exercises and workshopy things around the 7 habits of highly effective people, Stephen Covey. And it just seems like kind of matter of fact, but realizing how much of it resonated with me and took a big part of my life from the time that I did them. It was like all those little lessons kept coming back over and over again, which is really interesting. So so that's something that I thought about. I guess the other books that have influenced me lately are a lot more nonfiction, which is interesting because I used to be an avid like murder mystery fan, and maybe that started out just from being very young and reading Harriet the Spy and trying to figure out and solve things to big murder mystery type Harlan Coben, Carl Hiaasen stuff. But I got to meet a lot of the authors. I used to do travel arrangements for a mystery conference, so I've gotten to meet a lot of them. So funny story, I was in Albuquerque a couple of weeks ago visiting, and I ran into Eric, and a friend of mine opened up a bookstore, a used bookstore. So I'm wandering around the used bookstore that my friend, who's a Middle-east mystery writer, opened with his family. And I stumbled across a copy of the Rainforest book by Victor. I was like, wow, I can't find a copy of the book anywhere around the foundation, but I'm in a mystery bookstore that my friend owns. And so I got a less expensive copy of Victor's book. So I left it with Rochelle, his assistant, to sign. So anyway, it was fun and interesting too. So talking about some of the initiatives now, Jeff's done an amazing job with putting together the Ecosystem Builder Hub, which has become the repository. And he couldn't be on the call, but I'm wondering if either of you, and then if Sam kind of ends up chiming in with us, what do you think is missing, needed, helpful to help move that initiative forward? Is there something that that we can do more to support that effort? Is there another effort that needs to be had?
I haven't looked at the initiatives underneath storytelling for a while, or if I did, they're not coming to me. If you have them in front, share what they are.
Yeah, I mean, I can drop Jeff's thing in, it's in Slack.
Yeah,
So,
Jeff,
hi, Sam, are you with us? Hey, I can't hear you. She looks perplexed. Okay. I don't know. We'll share this with her after. Go ahead, Hassan.
I was going to say Jeff dropped something in Slack today. I hadn't had a chance to read it yet. But I think there's an update.
It's an update of his brief. I think we're trying to figure out if he, one of the things I think early on that we talked about, Beth, was that the focus that your initiative brief initially had versus what Jeff had, maybe not versus, but in addition to what Jeff had, Jeff's initiative brief was more of an inward approach of what ecosystem builders need and stories to share.
Right.
And yours was more of an outward approach, like more of the PSA stuff.
Right.
I'm wondering if that's something that that we could do a little bit more of, like telling our story better. Does that make sense?
And I think I put in Slack the Global Awareness Campaign brief of a few days ago, or a week or 10 days. I'm not the one, but recently. And that fits, and I did a brief on it as well. And that does fit directly under the storytelling goal as well as the goal number 6. So can they run parallel to each other and bump into each other and cross-pollinate? I think so. But from my pain point of getting to talk with other ecosystem builders has been relieved based on my interactions with all of you folks, right? My stronger pain point as an ecosystem builder is that outside external stakeholder understanding and support in a real meaningful way. The talk is certainly there, the actions aren't quite yet. So that's where I'm coming from, and I have to believe that others feel similar.
I totally agree. Hassan, what do you think?
So I don't know if this is a matter of what comes first, the chicken or the egg, but I think I look at what Jeff, Tyler, and Luke has been doing, and there are a lot of great ideas, but I think it comes down to capacity. So without having something fully funded or built out more, at this stage, how much further can it go? Because this is going to require a lot of people working on it all the time.
Yeah.
And for me, it's the thing I think that holds it back at this point is probably capacity. I think there are a lot of storytelling efforts regionally across the country that this initiative can plug into. I know in the Detroit area, there are various initiatives around storytelling. I know that exists around the country, so plugging directly into those would help this effort as well.
I'm having a really hard time hearing.
I'm sorry, can you hear me better now?
No.
Sorry.
Turn your volume up.
Yeah. Let me see what I can do here.
I think to Hassan's point, it's about getting more support so that so it could be more robust, right, Hassan? I think that you can only go so far, but you're right. So Jeff also has a challenge because it's not. It needs to be funded and supported. I mean, he can't just keep doing this for free. So helping him to think around who of the NRPs or what can help support this in moving forward. I think as we create more awareness of the repository and more contributions, it becomes a more robust channel so that people can tap into it. So I think it's a process. I think the internal tension is whether or not I think the fear, and understandably so, is that some other entity will swoop in, take the idea, and move forward with it, and not include the ecosystem builders who are supporting this. So I think what we have to be very mindful of is trying to support each other and making sure that doesn't happen that way. To Beth's point, I think the universal support, the PSA, a wider global awareness thing needs to happen. I was just at GEC, and they talked about building one global ecosystem. And the interesting thing is, I think that they may not have understood exactly what the ecosystem is, or whether or not they were ecosystem builders. I think they're just excited to be part of something. And that's maybe the first thing that it was for all of us. It was like we were excited to be part of something, and you saw other people in the room who kind of got the something that you are now a part of. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Hassan, let's see if we can hear you now.
Is that better at all? Or? Yeah, sorry. I think I'm probably in a place where I can get signal. No, I mean, you rephrased exactly what I was trying to say, Cecilia, in a very succinct way. I think it's a matter of there's only so much that the folks working on this can do without it being fully funded.
Right. So it's almost like, when the Global Awareness Campaign document came from a document that we created for our region, because our region doesn't have a brand, or people either know Erie exists and have a negative perspective of it, or they don't know it exists at all. So internally we have self-confidence issues. People say Erie's like the most beautiful girl in the world with the lowest self-esteem. And externally we have no, and CBS swooped in here and did a really negative story on Erie, and we all kind of scrambled, and we came together to create this plan to change the opinions internally to our community's culture, and then create the story that we want to share with the rest of the world about what Erie is. So standing up an organization or a function within an organization that is responsible for creating and managing the brand awareness for ecosystem building is not rocket science. It's something that can be done. It just takes resources. It's creating relationships for earned media, spending on pure advertising in the digital spaces, especially as well, and just managing that and on an ongoing basis. So how do we get with the resource provider that believes in that and understands, like SourceLink, how much more business that is going to result in for them? Everybody wins if we do that, right? If we convince, like the Got Milk or Your Brain on Drugs campaign, if everybody in the world is convinced that entrepreneurial ecosystem building is a key economic development, economic driver, then we get the resources that we need. Or people don't get elected if they don't support this kind of thing, because the rest of the world knows it's important, right? Sorry for the soapbox.
Hang on, I'm stuck. I'm trying to Slack Eric the invite at the same time that I'm doing this. So bear with me 1 second.
So that clearinghouse function could also act as the clearinghouse for the ecosystem builders themselves to either share, the relationship with that function with the ecosystem builders across the country. Hey, Hassan, what do you got going on in Detroit this month or this quarter? And got anything feature worthy? And just managing those relationships on an ongoing basis. It's a couple of people's or more jobs, full-time jobs to manage this thing on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, I think one of the things is to figure out what it's going to cost to manage and from there, put together like a brief. So one of the things that we talked about, and to your point, Beth, when we talked about the the PSA portion, or the global awareness portion, and the other one, some of the things that Andy and I have been talking about, and we're going to have deeper discussions, is we asked everybody to create a brief so that we can make it simpler to have people be able to look at. But I think what we're going to end up doing, and this is something that I'll be sharing on an ESHIP champion call, is is to do an even simpler brief, right, of the 30 some odd initiatives that we have, so that we can have people do their own iterations of it. So remember last year when we were at the ESHIP Summit, and we had roundtable groups under each of the goals. So the 7 goals had people sitting at like 6 different tables, right? And so your table discussed something, and we mapped it out, and we kind of scribed it, and then when we did that, we were able to maybe come together and share to see what overlaps there were, or if we're talking about 2 different things, and then come up with separate initiatives under these things, right? And so so it seems like if we went back to that even briefer, simpler interpretation, and decided like what lives under that. So let's say under storytelling, like we talked about, a storytelling repository that's searchable, right, is one form of storytelling. And then under another one, create a global awareness campaign. So they're both to create some kind of storytelling initiative to connect the networks, but they're different versions of the same main idea. And then seeing whether or not they come together, or they're operated as 2 separate ideas and funded as 2 separate pilots, right? So you can focus, but still have the awareness and the connection of knowing that there's something else going on. Does that make sense? So sometimes it helps not to silo, but to caucus, because if you have an initiative that needs to be all about how to engage other people, that's the focus. If you do, you can't be all things to all people, so that's why you have different divisions of a company, but then they all come together, so we operate all as the same company.
Right.
And so under this initiative, there are separate ideas, but I mean, it's just everything is a draft. So this is just the stuff that we're working towards, and whether or not that makes sense, and that's kind of being fleshed out this week as we firm up some of the discussions, and a lot of it rests in Mike's mind. So thank goodness for the value web to help us synthesize all of those ideas and come up with the tools to make stuff happen. So what do you think about that? Does that seem weird? Does that make sense?
They're just so related. I think that you would lose something to keep them separate. I think maybe for clarity's sake at the summit, keeping them separate probably makes sense. But when the actual budgeting and resourcing comes into play, I think they need to be together, because if we're working on a repository for ecosystem builders and we're getting really cool stuff, some of that stuff should be shared globally. And on the flip side of that, if we're running a global awareness campaign that, by the way, we kind of strawmanned out at between $250,000 and $350,000 a year, if everybody is being educated through an effective global awareness campaign, that also gives ecosystem builders that connection with each other. Oh, I'm an ecosystem builder. I didn't even know that. right? So they complement each other so well that I think separating them long term would be a mistake.
Okay. And I don't think it's separating them long term. I think it's like working departmentally almost. But Hassan, what do you think?
So, I mean, we've always talked about how everything, all of the initiatives and the goals are interconnected. And to Beth's point, I think it's pretty much a matter of figuring out in terms of execution of them, does it make more sense to have them separate or to combine them? I think uh, with storytelling, the external stuff and the messaging to external partners, I think it is interrelated to the stuff that we're doing for ecosystem builders. So to separate them out entirely, I mean, I think it's good to separate them so that you look at them differently, but in terms of execution of it, I think they still have to be connected so that they don't go off in different directions. If that makes sense.
No, I think that completely makes sense. So Eric, can you hear us now?
Yes, can you hear me? I'm guessing that the answer is no.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, awesome. I hope hopefully there's not too much road noise. Sorry to join late, but thanks for helping me get in here.
No, we're glad that you made it. So we've been discussing the different focuses between internal ecosystem building stories and external ecosystem building stories, and trying to figure out what that looks like. So I'm going to actually have Beth describe it to you, so that we're all seeing that we're tracking in the same way. So Beth, will you give Eric an update on what we talked about, and then we'll have Eric chime in.
Okay, hi Eric. So we were talking about the two original briefs for storytelling that we drafted. Jeff drafted the awesome one around the internal focus, I guess for lack of a better term, on helping ecosystem builders connect and share stories amongst each other and best practices and tips and kind of that activity, which is awesome. And then my focus was more on, we need to educate everybody across the country, if not the world, as to the ecosystem builder function and its importance to economic progress. And we were talking about, we've both done briefs now as well. And the Global Awareness Campaign falls under goal number 6, but it also is very relevant to the storytelling goal. So we were talking about the difference between the two, but how they complement each other. And, for the summit's sake and for clarity's sake at the summit, maybe keeping those two initiatives separate, but ultimately, if we stand this function up, how closely related they are and how they complement each other. One example I gave was, if someone's over here managing the ecosystem builders relationship across the country, and they're sharing all these stories and best practices and tips, there's ultimately going to be stories in there that the Global Awareness Campaign could and should use to educate the rest of the world, and vice versa. The Global Awareness Campaign, when it's effective, is educating everybody as to the importance of entrepreneurial ecosystem building for a thriving economy. That means we're also reaching ecosystem builders that didn't know that they were ecosystem builders, to recruit them to come and share, right? So I think that's where we are. Hassan, Celia, did I miss anything? What do you think?
I think you did great. Okay, so Eric, when you hear that, what does it make you think about? Just to totally put you on the spot.
You're muted.
So I'll have to have you unmute so we can hear you. Okay, we'll wait for Eric to unmute. And so what can we do to help move this initiative forward, or does it just need to kind of sit and have things contributed, like what's going on right now? Oh, there's Eric. Okay, Eric. No, you're unmuted, but I can't hear you now. kind of.
He's killing me.
We know that he's going to say something like amazing, so we're just waiting. Okay. So has either any of you seen some of the stories that Jeff's been collecting from other people besides the ones he's been writing?
I lost the link.
Oh, I have to have Jeff repost it. So
I get all of the updates, and I've been reading them together. They're great stories.
yeah, there was one that that Annika wrote that was just reposted in the Kaufman newsletter, so that was pretty cool.
That was cool.
Yeah, I think that when we have it's like one of ours speaking, you know, as opposed to a foundation writing the information and putting out things that they're sharing, that the story's coming from somebody just like each of you. That's tremendously powerful, right? So I thought that was pretty cool.
So I think this would probably get a little more traction once we start working on the stuff that's focused on national resource providers or the PSAs, because at this point, I think although it's all very helpful, we're preaching to the choir in a sense. And I think until we start putting out things for national resource providers, for people who aren't aware of the field, who aren't aware of what we're doing, I think once we start doing that, this will gain more traction.
Yeah, and some of the discussions that I've had with people recently who are involved in entrepreneurial efforts is that they don't quite get ecosystem building, like they understand that they're part of the ecosystem, and they get that aspect, but the whole building an ecosystem, like what makes you an ecosystem builder as opposed to just part of a thing, right? Like what does that entail? And I think that's what we're trying to define is what are the things that make someone an ecosystem builder? And I know that I've asked you two in particular, as well as others in the ESHIP champion world, like what makes you an ESHIP champion? Like what are the things that we should look for in someone? What are the traits and how do you bring them up and elevate them and support them to champion initiatives? So so maybe the thing is, once we figure out what makes an ecosystem builder, because there are plenty of people that run co-working spaces, accelerators, incubators, university programs, policymakers who are part of the ecosystem. I mean, they're all part of the ecosystem. But what makes one? It's that nuance, right? It's that extra something, and maybe part of that is trying to define what that is. So
we were talking about that the other day on the Goal 7 call, Hassan. Remember when we were talking about anyone that, it's my opinion anyway, anyone that exists in full or at least in part to support the success of entrepreneurs, ecosystem building should be a part of their job, right? They should be responsible for openly making those connections that are needed to help move the entrepreneurs' goals forward.
is that something that's expected of those people? Is that something that's hoped for those people?
Currently, I would say it's something that's hoped for. It's not in writing anywhere.
Right, because it's not in your job description, right? Make connections or whatever, which is a very different way of like looking at traditional job descriptions.
Right.
Right. So going back to the job description thing, if you're describing a storyteller, is it someone who just relays information? So we circle back all the way to the beginning of the call in saying there are people who write books, and there are people who write stories that that inspire you and empower you and affect your life in some way, whether they're an example of what you don't want to be or an example of what you strive for. It's something that changes behavior in some way. So
give before you get, kind of, and it goes back to the give and take book again. I'm curious because I'm dying to get some feedback on that draft job description. Have you guys looked at it?
A little bit, and I think that those are things that we definitely, it would help to look at. I mean, just because I would look at it or Andy would look at it or Christine, we're only a segment of it. I think it's really important to hear what the greater field thinks about it, and that's part of the whole idea with the summit, right? So when I keep saying it's just a point in time, but it's just a point in time when we all come together to review and input, and when else are you going to have this opportunity but to convene all these people? So what can we do as far as the storytelling stuff at the summit or for the summit? Because I think we agree that the global awareness stuff and the storytelling repository are vital to the things that we do. Is there something missing? Is there something that we can do to support? Or what is it? What should the ask be so that we make sure we incorporate that? Hassan, do you have any ideas on that?
I really don't. I know I really need to form my ideas on it. I don't have anything to offer right now. I think there are so many other initiatives that are so directly connected to this. Putting together a dictionary of terms, a lexicon that we use, that's all going to be very important to this because, again, you mentioned this earlier, but there are people that are doing this work and don't recognize they're doing this work because they're doing it under different titles, or because they might not know what the verbiage is that we use. So I think all of that is also connected. The dictionary of terms and the lexicon is very much connected to the storytelling initiative succeeding, so that people understand the words that we're using and we're all, in a sense, speaking the same language, because we could be all talking about the same thing and using different words. And if we're doing the storytelling stuff using words that aren't common language that we all use, I don't think it'll be successful. So the dictionary of terms, I think, is going to be very important to this succeeding.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think case studies the same way when we talk about measurements and all those things that we look for, because that's the hardest one. And that tells a story. And if we don't talk about that narrative, then we won't get anywhere. Beth, what do you think about this?
Well, I kind of would like to see maybe a directory of the NRPs and talk through with you guys and Christine about who are most likely to want to support this storytelling goal. And how do we provide the value proposition to them that aligns with their needs? Like my example earlier with SourceLink. If the whole world knows that entrepreneurial ecosystem building is key, that means a lot more business for SourceLink. And I'm sure that's true for a lot of the other NRPs, if not all of them. So how do we get that plan, the strategy to get NRP support?
Right. No, I agree.
You know what? TED Talk just started on my phone, but I'm getting rid of it.
Oh, okay. All right. So Eric, you're back, and we would love to hear from you, and try to figure out how we move this and support this and all of those things. So give us some of your wisdom.
Oh, thank you. I don't feel on the spot at all. That's fantastic. I think everything's already been solved from what I can. Oh, so Hassan hasn't seen me with my, I don't know, my spring cut. I don't know that I have any wisdom. I think it sounds that I heard what Beth had to say before, and then I had some technical problems. But it sounds in general good. Are we? It feels like are we looking to move into tactics? It feels like the general process and kind of general strategies in place, but it feels like we need to get more tactical. Is that the case? And I just read through Jeff's stuff a little bit earlier.
So I think the conversation has been that storytelling is crucial.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's crucial for the global awareness side to introduce people to the fact that they are part of the ecosystem, and we need them to be part of the building team. Some people are and some people aren't, and we note that. So telling those stories is imperative for the robustness and the sustainability of what we're trying to build. And Hassan shared, like even the idea of having common terminology. That's also how we tell our story, how we define things, so people understand. Because I think right now, back in 2017, when we showed up at this conference that we didn't quite know what it was, right? We showed up, at least for me, showing up the first ESHIP Summit was saying, wow, you're part of this thing. And I have no idea what the heck an ESHIP is, but I walked into a room that had more diversity than I've seen in most conferences, and talking to people who geek out on the same things. And they said, I'm an early adopter of ecosystem building, and I don't know, right? Like, this is a new term for me, but okay. And then here we are a couple of years later, and I hear the term ecosystem building everywhere. Like, everybody's saying it. I don't know that everybody quite understands it or considers it in the same way that some of us on this call do, because we've talked to each other at length. So as we've conversed and learned from each other what each of us bring to the table, that we have a shared idea or a shared understanding of the concept of ecosystem building. Now it's a matter of sharing that information with the wider world. So at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress last week, 170 plus countries got together, about 1,800 to 2,000 foreign delegates that joined together, and they wanted to build, so the branding said, we want to build one global ecosystem. And they were very excited to be part of something, and so everybody kept saying the word ecosystem, but I know from conversations that that Matt from the foundation had with several people, like, I don't know that it was an understanding. I talked to people who said, oh yeah, so we're all part of something, so why are we building? Like that building part, and the difference between what an ecosystem builder is as opposed to just being part of a greater ecosystem. Does that make sense? So Eric, if you were to, let's say, give Jeff and Beth advice on their two I think they're correlating, but they're not the same kind of initiative, right? So one is more a global awareness thing, and one is more of just a repository of different ecosystem builder stories. What can we do to help support those efforts moving forward?
Totally. So let's see. So I think I think I describe what Jeff's involved with. That's sort of an emerging kind of property situation where it's kind of have to be, I mean, my feeling is in general that ends up being pretty organic. So we need to kind of see what different folks, what kind of conversations they're having, what do they want to have. And until we see that kind of stuff happening naturally, we're not necessarily going to know what the right thing to do is. So I think that's one challenge. The other thing that I was just starting to write, in chat is, I know I operate a lot better if I know what audience segment are we going after. So for instance, if our main audience segment was, let's say, government leaders, if that's, and I don't know where that ranks in terms of different kinds of folks that we need to talk with, but whether it's them or potential, say, funders or other, large nonprofits, whatever that segment is, I think there's probably a little more strategy around reaching those kinds of folks. And once we start kind of knowing who, specifically who those audience members are, that helps inform whatever kind of strategy I'd be thinking about. So right now, not necessarily top of mind, but just coming to mind, Case Foundation, Rise of the Rest, Revolution, that's all mobilizing to do Florida next week. How are we reinforcing the importance of the ecosystem builders throughout Florida and Puerto Rico so that they, I think Case Foundation, those folks, they get how important ecosystem building is to some degree, but I don't know how front of mind it is. If we want them to be like, we'll invest $500,000 to support ecosystem builders, what is it we need to do to get into their heads and say, not only is this important, but we need your investment now. So that's the kind of thing that I haven't seen us do yet, is really get pretty tactical and just boil it down to, I need Anna Mason and Steve Case to say yes to X number of dollars. How do we get there? That's the kind of thing that I'd love to get into. And I think it's similar with elected leaders, whether it's local or state level. But I do think that, and some of that's probably not a lot of social media kind of stuff. Some of that's like a showing up at the right conference. It's finding the people in their community. That's much more of like a face-to-face, almost like event-driven kind of thing versus more of a media campaign. But I think once we know which and prioritize which audience we want to go after, then that makes it a lot more concrete to me, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Okay, so I'm going to go off book and say I have had a conversation just last week with somebody that at least a couple of us know, who is part of whose city is part of this Rise of the Rest tour, but not being engaged by the Rise of the Rest people. And the frustration is that this person has been doing the thing for 8 years now in that in the space, like being a builder, created something that that wasn't there before. And then what they're going to end up doing is they're highlighting somebody who is not been in the entrepreneurial ecosystem building environment, but they're creating the new thing. So it's the new, cool, sexy development. And so that's the story that's being told. Yes. So now I think part of it is, what do we do as a community to help support the person that we recognize as somebody who's been a thought leader and a motivator and worked on this thing for a long time? And how do we bring light to that? Because how do you steer the Rise of the Rest to actually recognize the efforts of someone who's there?
That happens to all of us, I think.
And it's a frustration, I think, anytime. So we're going into this a little bit with a Forward Cities thing, and I think it's the kind of thing that we want to work on when we're talking about the regional leadership summits. So I think boiling that into the process of engaging with the community is really, really key. In this case, we don't own the enterprise, so tactically, I think there's a couple people on the Revolution team that I'd feel happy to kind of ping on the side and say, hey, we really need to get this or that person on the bus for 15 minutes between stops because they're doing a key thing. I think that's personal relationships, and it's just, getting the right, 2 or 3 people to say, hey, this person's doing amazing work. I'd love to get them a little bit of visibility. Because knowing how their operation is, their calendars, they may have a couple of 15-minute chunks to play with right now. But aside from that, all the major pieces are already in place.
Yeah, and I think that's crucial, and I feel like that's almost our role is, and I said that to them. I said, let us help you tell that story, right? I think it's important because you may not feel like you should advocate for yourself, right? And that's what sometimes happens. It's like, okay, so humbly, you're being missed along the way, and that's just not right. That's not what we do as ecosystem builders. We don't let that thing happen on our watch to say, okay, so it can't, and it doesn't have to be an either or. It could be a this and, right? So there's no reason why you can't highlight what you've already set out to highlight. But please keep in mind that there is something else going on, and it's really important. So, Beth, you were going to say something.
Well, just in the experiences that I've had in that space where others jump in and bring things like Rise of the Rest or whatever here and totally ignore the fact that, we're here and we started this ecosystem building stuff way before a lot of them were even in the community. But and just, it's internally, personally, very frustrating, and it builds a lot of anger and distrust. But not showing that and celebrating what they're doing is the only thing that I have found that makes it palatable. Celebrating the more resources that are here, celebrating that they're getting recognition for that outwardly and moving on. It all comes around sooner or later, and I think I mentioned somebody was posting the other day on Slack, I think, about the bad actors, and it's like in here it seems very seasonal or cyclical, that some of them start being crazy for a while and then all of a sudden they're your best friend and then they get in a weird mood again. It's just I guess human nature, and if somebody's getting too much recognition in someone else's mind, they do what they can to thwart it. I don't know. It's just, I think every community and every ecosystem builder is going to experience that at some level.
And I think maybe that's where the job, that's also storytelling, right? Advocating for fellow ecosystem builders is also a part of storytelling, because we have to be able to raise up the people that have been doing it. I think more so than calling out bad players, it's a matter of raising up, like, this is the bar. This is what we want to achieve. This is where we try to honor the work of people that have come before. So anyway, so a couple of, any last thoughts and words while we lost Sam somewhere. She came on the call, but we didn't quite get to her. But I really appreciate the time, and I hope that as Jeff watches this, and Eric, you and I after my meetings will talk for sure. But any words of advice, any last words, so that we can send people off and figure out what we do next for storytelling.
So one reason to try and jump on this is I suggested in kind of the most recent iteration around the unconference. So one way of doing unconferences is sometimes you curate a couple of tracks and then the rest are all very open. Going off of a suggestion or something that Jeff had commented on, I like the idea of having something that's almost like a storytelling track as part of that. So not for right the second, but if we can think about different ideas of things that we could do, sometimes it's workshop-y kind of stuff, sometimes, I don't know, but if you can think of things that we could do with some of the time during the unconference that's specific to storytelling about either of these, whether it's among our ecosystem builders or externally, I think that would be really useful to plug into that unconference piece.
Great suggestion. Beth?
Yeah, I think that's a great suggestion, and I can't wait for us to dig more into the tactical side of things. And just real quick, Eric, you had mentioned what audiences we were going after, and my experience has been that the audience is everyone, and the one-on-ones with electeds and funders, et cetera, of course, would need to happen and be part of the strategy. But the global awareness campaign like the Got Milk or Your Brain on Drugs that really educates everybody, forces that the elected officials and the funders to have to support this thing because everybody knows how important it is now, right? So I wouldn't, from my experience, I wouldn't worry too much about segmenting the messaging initially.
So, and Hassan, what do you think?
Actually, I really like that idea that Eric just brought up, incorporating storytelling. Conference.
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
I'm sorry, I apologize, but I don't know what's going on.
No, that's all right.
The storytelling, what Eric just brought up about storytelling and somehow incorporating that.
So I think during the unconference thing, to share what I think Hassan and Eric were both saying is that there could be something around that. I think what, if you remember and I'll post it in the Slack channel, the why we do what we do that came out of the summit last year. I think it's a good thing to watch, and maybe it's something like that, right? And to maybe bring it along further, and we talk about making a pledge. So I'm wondering if that's something that we could start kind of recording, or just taking clips of people saying, as an ecosystem builder, I pledge to whatever it is, and that comes up with a mission vision statement. That's also part of telling our story, right? So I'm going to share that, and then I'm going to upload this video. I've been updating a lot of the videos. Thank you, Hassan, for leading the charge the other day when I was on a plane.
You did a great job.
I do. Great. I appreciate all of you. I will talk to all of you very soon.
Cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Take care. Have a great day.